Hello, good morning, everyone, and good afternoon for those in the Eastern time zone. Thank you so much for joining our session today on building and expanding local coalitions to advance upward mobility in your community. My name is Annie Heinrichs. I'm a training and technical assistant specialist in the Research to Action Lab at the Urban Institute and part of Urban's team working on upward mobility. Today, we are going to kick things off with an overview of the upward mobility framework, and then we'll dive into best practices for building cross-sector coalitions and hear some examples from the field. Joining us from Urban today is Martha Fedorowicz, the Director of Technical Assistance for the Upward Mobility Initiative, and Joe Schilling, a Senior Research Associate in the Research to Action Lab. And later, we will hear from two communities from our Mobility Action Learning Network. Throughout this presentation, we encourage you to share questions in the Q&A box by clicking the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom screen. Our team will be monitoring your questions to answer either directly in the Q&A box or live. We also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of this presentation where our presenters will be able to answer more. And with that, I am pleased to introduce Martha.
Thanks so much, Annie. I imagine that many of you are already familiar with our upward mobility framework, but I'm going to briefly walk us through it because I think it's helpful context to keep in mind as we transition to talking about building and sustaining upward mobility coalitions. So this is our upward mobility framework. Throughout the next few slides, I'll walk you through each component of it in more depth. The framework starts with a three-part definition of mobility from poverty that was developed by the U.S. Partnership on Mobility from Poverty. What the partnership found is that economic success, or having a good income and having wealth, that alone is not enough to really move out of poverty. In order to move out of poverty and stay out of poverty, people also need to feel that they have power and autonomy in their lives, which is the ability to make choices and influence actions that affect your future, and also feel that they're valued in their community and can contribute to it. And so this broader conception of mobility, which we refer to as the three-part definition, is what drives our work. Research shows that people of color are disproportionately impacted by structural barriers to upward mobility in the United States. And so our framework emphasizes that a focus on racial equity in local upward mobility work is necessary to ensure that all people and communities can prosper. For that reason, racial equity acts as the thread that connects all of the framework's components, from the predictors of mobility and how they're measured to the desired outcome of equitable upward mobility. Local leaders applying the framework must embed racial equity in both their processes and their goals to ensure that they serve those who have been most harmed. The next component of the framework is the pillars. People cannot surmount systemic barriers to upward mobility on their own. Communities must ensure that residents can access the supports that all people need to achieve economic success, power and autonomy, and dignity. The Upward Mobility Framework identifies 5 pillars of support that are interconnected and essential to mobility. So rewarding work pays a living wage, provides dignified work conditions, and offers economic security. High quality education from preschool through post-secondary provides a crucial avenue to economic and social mobility. Opportunity-rich and inclusive neighborhoods play a central role in supporting families' stability and well-being, their access to social and economic opportunities, and children's chances to thrive and succeed. Healthy environment and access to good healthcare help people of all ages to surmount life's challenges, excel in school and on the job, ensure their family's well-being, and fully participate in their communities. And finally, responsive and just governance engages residents in decision-making and serves the needs of all community members with restraint and fairness. The next component of the framework is the predictors. For local leaders to improve conditions that lead to upward mobility and racial equity, they need to know what to change and how. The predictors give communities that information. They are 24 factors strongly associated with long-term economic success, dignity and belonging, and power and autonomy. Examples of predictors across the 5 pillars include things like living wages, access to preschool, housing stability, access to health services, and political participation. Local leaders can measure the status of each predictor and progress toward improving it using our suite of mobility metrics, which can be found in our upward mobility data dashboard. So now, to set the stage for our presenters in a little bit and share a bit more about how we've learned what makes a good coalition, I want to briefly mention our Mobility Action Learning Network. In 2024, Urban hosted the Mobility Action Learning Network, a cohort of 26 cross-sector teams from across the US, united in their goal to boost upward mobility and equity in their communities. Each mobility action team was comprised of representatives from at least one local government and one nonprofit organization. This map shows the 26 communities that we worked with, which included places like Green Bay, Wisconsin, Palm Beach County, Florida, Providence, Rhode Island, Pima County, Arizona, and Tulsa, Oklahoma. The Mobility Action Learning Network was divided into 4 tracks designed to provide members with concrete tools, strategies, and peer learning opportunities that matched their learning needs. Teams were able to select which track they wanted to join in their application. The 4 tracks that we had were using data for decision-making, building coalitions for systems change, empowering community partners, and measuring impact. And today, of course, you'll be hearing from 2 members from our Building Coalitions from Systems Change track. This track guided teams on how to identify and engage key mobility stakeholders and champions central to advancing upward mobility. Teams built or expanded a cross-sector coalition capable of creating systems changes and promoting mobility from poverty and racial equity in their community. This is a list of the places that were participating in this track. And as Amy mentioned, today you'll be hearing from representatives from the Alexandria, Virginia and Santa Barbara County, California teams. And with that, I'll pass it over to Joe to talk more about building, strengthening, and sustaining coalitions.
Thanks, Martha and Annie. So before we turn it over to our presenters, I wanted to outline a few elements of both building and strengthening and, of course, sustaining your coalition. So first, I'm going to chat a little bit about why. Like, why are coalitions essential to tackling upward mobility? Next, we'll do a little conversation about who should really be part of your upward mobility coalition and share some resources from our new online toolkit that should help you assess where you are in that process. Then we'll speak about how to keep that coalition momentum going, how to strengthen that coalition, and then finally, some considerations for sustaining your coalition in the long term. So that's an existential question. Why are coalitions essential? Well, the answer is somewhat simple in that the complexity of upward mobility, the complexity of trying to address poverty really requires a cross-sector collaboration to address these systemic barriers that really prevent upward mobility. Many of you, know this firsthand from your work in the field that people who are experiencing poverty really face just a complex web of policies and programs and systematic and structural barriers that often impede or undermine their best efforts. So in order to address this complexity and remove those systemic barriers, it really requires a holistic approach so that you can attack poverty from a lot of different angles in terms of policies and programs and look across different policy domains. So, for example, just consider the challenge of affordable housing. In order to truly tackle housing affordability, you've got a lot of different barriers dealing with maybe zoning and land use policy, the construction and building industry. You've got to include banking and financing, employment, jobs, workforce development, and of course, municipal property taxes. So addressing all these issues requires this kind of cross-sector, cross-agency collaboration. And it's no different when we're thinking about upward mobility. So what that also means is that there are many actors that are required to advance this systems change because we just talked about why, excuse me, no single actor can change these systems on their own. So through our engagement with the Learning Network, the different communities really confirmed that in order to address their upward mobility challenges, they really needed to weave together a more collaborative coalition. So in forming this coalition, of course, it becomes critical to recruit actors from a variety of sectors: local government, community members, elevating the community voice as sort of the end users of many of these different strategies. Nonprofit and community-based organizations, as well as philanthropy, play critical roles in coalitions to address poverty and advance upward mobility. But recognize that all of these different actors come with different priorities, right? And different underlying interests. Obviously, those who are involved with food insecurity, like food banks, that's their top priority. Housing advocates are focused on shelter, housing stability. And of course, policymakers are trying to balance and juggle all of these different competing interests. Direct service providers also have interests. So the challenge really is, how do you align these diverse voices? And how would you align these different sectors with all these varying goals and constraints, and who touch the issue of upward mobility at different levels? So here's a list, again, of some of the usual suspects that you would see, right? Again, those who are most affected by the issue could be recipients of some of the social services you provide, neighbors, those charged with carrying out those functions, whether that's at government or nonprofit level, and of course, those who are directly involved in providing some of those services, whether it's providing jobs, there's landlords who are providing shelter. But also think about what I would say is sort of the champions from the community, because these champions can come in a whole variety of um, different shapes and sizes, different organizations. They might be community-based. They also might be within different organizations like foundations or civic organizations. So thinking about those champions at different scales and at different parts of your community will be key actors in building that coalition. So building and strengthening coalitions is hard work, as you will hear from our two presenters shortly. And so at Urban, what we've been able to do is develop some tools based on our work with different communities to help you. So again, on our website at urban-upwardmobility.org, there's a toolkit. So if you click on that toolkit, you'll see a variety of different tools that you can use at different stages and at different dimensions of your upward mobility journey. And a good place to start is with a stakeholder inventory and assessment, because what this does is it really helps you kind of reflect on maybe who is currently part of your coalition, or as you're forming your coalition, who should be on that invite list. So what the stakeholder inventory can do is it can help you identify those potential coalition members and assess, where are some of the new partnerships that we really need to go out and forge? Are there some new opportunities? Maybe there's a new school board member that's been elected. Maybe there's a new head of United Way, or could be new city council members. But also think about different levels. It doesn't always have to be the head of a department or the head of an agency or elected official, but those folks who are sort of program directors at different levels and scales, because they are a great bridge between those who are in positions of authority as directors and managers, but also they are working on the ground with staff and service providers. So they have a good sense of what's going on at both levels. So as you think about the stakeholder inventory, again, what are some of those connection points that you can work on in order to make sure that they're part of your coalition. So now that you've figured out maybe who is part of that coalition, how do you strengthen and sustain that coalition? Because let's face it, every community that's on this call is at different stages in forging their upward mobility efforts. And that coalition might be in the early stages, or it may be at a stage where it needs some new energy, some new momentum. So coalition building is really a dynamic enterprise. And in order to navigate those relationships, just recognize that the goal for you all is to maintain balance as you navigate these changes and transitions. So, what are some helpful tips for maintaining that momentum, strengthening your coalition? Um, so one is just adopting a philosophy, really an approach of continuous learning. Since this is a dynamic environment, think about regularly asking your coalition members, reflect, hey, what's working? Where can we improve? What's on the horizon that we need to think about? And beyond that, think about the processes that you use in order to generate goals and make major decisions. Make sure that everyone's on board when you're using more of a collaborative consensus building process, because ultimately that's going to be important so that everyone feels a sense of ownership in the direction of where that coalition is going. Certainly, it's important to think about the work from a management point of view. So if you can divide that work into smaller working groups, prioritize partnerships, maybe there's a housing working group, maybe there's a workforce development working group that you can help tackle some of those multiple dimensions of upward mobility. And then again, as your coalition evolves, you too will have to evolve. So make sure that you're kind of adding some structure to some of these elements of coalition building. And final slide, just to give you kind of try to pull all of these pieces together. We call this sort of the building blocks of sustaining a coalition, is again, changing the trajectory of your community's upward mobility efforts is not going to happen overnight. It will take time. And so you have to be thinking constantly how you care and feed your upward mobility coalition. Certainly, these 4 building blocks having effective structure for collaborative governance, you write down the rules of engagement in terms of the decisions that you make, how you make those decisions. Having sufficient capacity. Uh, Oftentimes these initiatives start out of, someone's office, like they're starting inside someone's garage. And, as you build momentum and as more people get on board, you need to have that capacity, someone who can, help manage and facilitate and coordinate those sessions. Stable funding is also critical. A lot of these coalitions start with people volunteering in-kind services because it's part of their usual day job. But as the coalition builds momentum, and in order to really have the impact and the change you want it to have, you want to make sure that there's stable funding and dedicated resources so that you can make progress. And then finally, having the flexibility to have pivots in your different policy and program activities to meet the moment. What's going on now? Where can we make changes and take advantage of opportunities in order to facilitate that systems change? Because again, systems change is the long game, and building the coalition in a collaborative cross-sector way will help you get there. Okay, so that gives you, in a nutshell, I'll just say, a very basic framework, both with the upward mobility framework and pillars that Martha talked about earlier, and some insights and practice tips related to building a coalition. But this is important to really learn as to what's going on in the field. And we've got two excellent examples from the City of Alexandria and Santa Barbara County to help illustrate some of these coalition building strategies. So our first presenter will be Julie Weiner, who is the Chief Development Officer for CommUnify, which is a regional nonprofit in Santa Barbara County that provides an array of social and educational services to the county's most vulnerable residents. And then after that, we will hear from Julie Mullen. Thank you, Julie.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for attending today and for your interest in what we're doing out here in Santa Barbara, California. So we started our initiative about 2.5 years ago, before we knew that there was such a thing as an upward mobility initiative. Santa Barbara is known as the American Riviera, home of, I don't know, Oprah Winfrey, Meghan and Harry, lots of famous people because of our proximity to Los Angeles and the entertainment community. It's a beautiful spot. When I came to work for CommUnify as the Chief Development Officer, not having a background in social services and trying to learn a little bit about what that all meant so I could raise money for the organization, we provide Head Start to the entire county of Santa Barbara and 15 other programs that serve low-income children, families, teens, and senior citizens. We're a community action agency. So in trying to educate myself, I stumbled across a report from an organization called the Public Policy Institute of California, which in 2021 told me that the Santa Barbara County area was actually at that time, we had the second highest percentage of our population living in poverty out of all 58 counties in the state of California. And I was shocked. I mean, every region has its share of homelessness and issues and challenges, and a percentage of the population that doesn't have enough resources. But to think that our beautiful Santa Barbara County, that is, seen as kind of this like American Riviera, was so highly ranked was very distressing to me. And I wondered why people weren't talking about this. We were talking about homelessness and housing and affordable workhouse housing and all that kind of stuff, but not actually the true problem, which is that too many people had insufficient resources. So I started speaking with my colleagues, and we can go ahead and go to the next slide, with some colleagues and other nonprofit organizations, and just said, when I shared this information, they were all shocked. And a month later, PIPA came out with a new report that noted that we had moved up to the #1 position, tied with LA County and another county. But we'd gone from 18% of our population to 20% of our population living in poverty. So when I shared this with my colleagues who were also working in community foundations, local government, nonprofit, everybody was equally shocked. And we said, we need to come together and do something about this. And we decided to hold a one-day conference on the high level of poverty in our county. And in trying to create a framework for that conference, we stumbled across the relatively new Upward Mobility Framework, threw our hats in the ring for the Mobility Action Learning Network, which was the best thing we ever did because it really gave us a lot of support and information. And we joined the Building Coalitions track because we wanted to make sure that we brought people in from different parts of the county, different organizations, and weren't disruptive to other initiatives in the county focused on homelessness and certain areas where people have lack of resource. So that was the background, and that's how we ended up coming into the network, learning about upward mobility. And we felt like it was a really great way to reframe what was happening in our county, because so many of the organizations in our coalition were longtime organizations working in poverty, trying to change things, places like United Way and our local community foundation. We had folks from the Department of Social Services at the county level. We had our local housing authority. So we were very much a mix in our coalition, 16 different organizations representing both CBOs and local government, all with a focus on trying to make things better for local low-income residents. But we all came at it from different angles. So having the framework and the pillars and this idea of upward mobility, we all felt that that was energizing, as opposed to, poverty seemed like this thing nobody has ever resolved, nor could anybody resolve. So we found that the framework, not just the pillars and how the Urban Institute has laid it out, but just the idea of changing out the word poverty for upward mobility seemed inspirational, and it seemed feasible. So we can go on to the next slide. So that's what we built our project as part of the Mobility Learning Network around, was putting together this summit, and also, how we would do outreach and how we would bring people into this day-long conference. We are very much a county that is divided north and south. And so we did something a little crazy, but we leveraged our city college in the south part of the county and our city college in the north part of the county, connected them with Zoom, and then made basically a half in-person, half digital conference. And I'm happy to explain more about that if anybody's interested when we get to the Q&A section. But we designed our summit to be kind of a kickoff, because we felt like a one-day conference was hopefully going to inspire people, but it certainly wasn't going to be sufficient to change anything. So it was designed to be the motivator to then create community coalition work groups to focus on trying to solve problems that were in the 5 pillar areas of the upward mobility framework. And so you'll see on the screen a little bit about the conference. We wanted to, again, inspire. The call to action by the end of the day was to join one of the 5 mobility action plan groups. So we leveraged the acronym. We called them MAP groups because we wanted to map our way to upward mobility. And in terms of the day, the conference itself, instead of trying to focus on specifically economic upward mobility, which I've seen a lot of other organizations doing, we focused on 3 areas: trying to change the framework and change the language. So introducing everybody who attended to the upward mobility framework concept and the pillars. We wanted to talk about literally changing the narratives, stop using the word poverty, start using upward mobility as the reference point, because we felt that there's a lot of power in how you speak and how you think about things. So that was an aspect. And then also public policy and advocacy, because I think a lot of us who are CBOs feel a little limited, a little helpless, and also possibly not educated in how to advocate for change. And our goal was to do the groundwork through the subsequent MAP groups, and then come back to the county and say, listen, this is a county problem. Now we've done all the legwork. We need you guys to shoulder the burden from here on out and make this a official project of the county, an official initiative, because there's going to be a point where on the ground, we can't make the changes. The county has to make it, or possibly even at the state level, but we need you guys to lobby. So that was the focus of the summit. And we felt like, we can go to the next slide, that we did a really great job in inspiring people. Yeah, people were very fired up. Matthew Desmond is a keynote speaker, was not cheap, but I highly recommend him because he really helped people believe, tired people who've been working in the trenches for a long time, really believe that they could make some difference. We had 70 people sign up for the MAP groups, and these are people from all across the county. And our summit was Friday, the 24th of January. And unfortunately, 2 days later, the following Tuesday, the new administration went ahead and just kind of blew everything up, froze funding, and initiated the chaos that's been the roller coaster that many of us have been on for the remainder of this year, to date. So I am the person who actually is raising all the money for the initiative. I had raised all the money for the summit, and I had raised all the money for the first year of the professional facilitators that we had hired to run the map groups, because none of us in our coalition felt like we should be running the map groups. We didn't have the expertise. So I had raised the money for the summit and the money for the map groups for the first year. Unfortunately, our organization, CommUnify, was acting as the fiscal agent for our coalition. It took us a few months for our board to determine if we could continue to move forward, because Head Start was one of the organizations across the nation that was hit by the funding freezes. And so at any rate, we hit a hiccup there, which was unfortunate. It delayed the launch of the map groups. They did finally launch in May. And we had about 2 meetings, and then we went into summer, July and August, a little bit of delays there with people having vacation schedules. And so where we stand right now is a couple of things. We've lost momentum. So we've had attrition from the participation in the map groups, which is unfortunate. But many organizations, these are people that were volunteering. They wanted to be a part of this initiative, and yet their organizations are very much destabilized by what's happening and at risk. So a lot of them have said, apologies, I need to focus on my day job, but keep me posted. But that's combined to create an effect where now I feel like we have 5 weekend map groups. So we are currently revising our strategy and looking about possibly condensing into one map group. We're looking at access to education as the backbone map group, and then tying that back into some of the areas that touch on the other 4 pillar areas. So we haven't stopped our initiative, but I would say it's very unfortunate, the timing of this all, because I think if what had happened in early February hadn't happened, we'd be much farther along. And then, of course, because Head Start's been so much under attack this year, I've really had to turn my energy back towards raising money for our own organization. So I think this is, true to what was said earlier by Joe, that local government ownership and stable funding are very key. And I think in our case, I wish that the leadership had not been us as a CBO, but actually part of the county, either an economic organization inside of the county or the county itself. So I think that's our learning of taken away from this is right idea, right inspiration, right framework. But that perhaps in our case, as a CBO with a very big program that's very much federally funded at risk right now, in the long run, who knew, right? That we might not have been the best people to take the lead on this, not for lack of desire, but for just needing to focus on keeping our own organization moving forward. That being said, I think that just participating in the Mobility Action Learning Network was very important, and we've already brought change and brought visibility to the issue here in our community. And I think that in and of itself is incredibly important. And that we know that this work will carry forward, but stay tuned in terms of how that evolves with us here in Santa Barbara County. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Julie. Before we get to the other Julie, I think maybe just a couple of questions is, where was the private sector involved in terms of the summit and in the coalition? How were they incorporated, and what role did they play?
Yeah, private sector came in as funders of the summit. Private sector has come in as participants in the map groups. And I would say we have a Chamber of Commerce that's been a coalition member. I mean, I guess they are a nonprofit, but I feel like they represent the private business sector. And so I think their voice has been important because a lot of, we are a tourism town. Tourism and agriculture, the wine industry are really big for us. And these are organizations that these businesses did not want to hear that we had such a high level of poverty. So we had some pushback from them, which was good because it caused us to educate ourselves more so that we could educate them more.
Got it. And then thinking again about the summit, it sounds like at that point there was a lot of interest. You had an amazing sort of turnout. What do you think helped people show up? I mean, how was how did you guys sort of generate that kind of energy and interest through your messaging and outreach?
Yeah, we did social media posts. We created, myself and my colleague, we created flyers that could be sent out digitally or printed. We were 16 organizations, so, we did a lot of forwarding those around to our own networks. We also did the traditional thing. We took out ads in our local weekly newspapers, just quarter page ads, but a couple of weeks leading into it. A lot of our staff sit on collaborative efforts around the county. So, we had our staff out there speaking about it. So we actually, we were hoping to get 400 people registered for the summit across these 2 locations. And we hit our goal. And we had some day of attrition, of course, as one always does. And we did not charge a fee. We discussed that ad nauseum because we felt like, a little skin in the game doesn't hurt. But if we were going to do a conversation around a subject that, involves lack of resources, we didn't want resources to be the reason anybody couldn't attend. So.
Great. Well, thank you, Julie. We'll have some more questions and comments after we hear from Julie Mullen. So, let me introduce Julie, who is the Economic Mobility Program Officer within the City of Alexandria, the Department of Community and Human Services. And just as a footnote, I am a resident of the City of Alexandria. So, Julie, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Joe, and thank you everybody for being here today. I am really excited to talk a little about what it took to grow our coalition at the City of Alexandria. And what I'm going to be talking about today, just a quick overview of the City of Alexandria, the structure of our coalition, a high-level picture of our goals and work at the coalition, and then some takeaways about what we've learned over the process. So a quick snapshot of the City of Alexandria for those of you who aren't familiar. We are a small historic tourist destination located on the Potomac River, right across from Washington, D.C. Similar to Santa Barbara, there's a lot of similarities. We're regularly appear in national rankings on Travel and Leisure's best cities to visit and Money Magazine's best cities to live. It's charming, it's vibrant, culture, historic architecture, waterfront, dining, shopping, proximity to DC, great parks and trails. You'd think I work for the tourist office, but come and visit anytime. It's a small city. We're 15 square miles and about 150,000 residents. It is very diverse, which again is a real asset. We have 118 countries represented and 127 native languages spoken within our public schools. The area median income is high, but so are income disparities by race, with white non-Hispanic households earning about $145,000 annually, while Black households earn about $79,000, and Hispanic or Latino of any race earning around $79,500 annually. Because it's a tourist destination, we do have a lot of service sector jobs, about 40%. So we have a lot of very low wage jobs, a lot of high wage jobs, and not a lot in the middle. As you can see from the slide, between the poverty rate and our ALICE population, or the percentage of people who earn more than the federal level but less than the basic cost of life essentials, we have almost 30% of our population, or 1 in 3, that are really struggling to make ends meet and pay for life's essential. So that is a big challenge for our community, and that comes up regularly across strategic planning efforts over city offices agencies, from the Office of Housing to the Health Department to the Children, Youth, and Family Strategic Plan, cost of living and poverty regularly rank in the top 3 issues that residents want to address, even among public school students. So next slide. So our Economic Stability Coalition was really born out of the launch of Arise, our guaranteed income pilot. Our pilot included 170 individuals who received $500 a month for 29 months, or about 2.5 years. We were really proud to be piloting an approach that encompassed the 3-part definition of economic mobility, with economic success, power and autonomy, and dignity. But we knew we needed to be doing more and something broader and more systemic, since the pilot was just working with 170 individuals. We really wanted to think about how we could create pathways to stability for more residents. So we have been talking about it with community partners and kind of within the city and thinking about what we could do. And we saw that Urban was launching a Mobility Action Learning Network. That was really our impetus. We were sort of like, look, we got it, or, let's do it. So similar to what Julie W. was saying, we threw our hats in the ring and we're super excited to join the Building Coalition's technical assistance track. So from the beginning, we agreed that we wanted our coalition to be really responsive to community and really grounded in what we were hearing from residents. We were okay with being fairly organic, which is a little bit code for we weren't really sure what we were doing in the beginning. We felt like we wanted a structure that could reflect that ability to be responsive and nimble. So this is what we came up with, and this is what we still have today. Our advisory committee is community leaders that come together in person monthly. We feel like that in person really connects us and builds the relationship that really gets us through some of the challenging times and challenging conversations. We have a backbone group that is myself, a peer at DCHS, and the VP of programming at Act for Alexandria, our community foundation. And we meet weekly and act as sort of the project managers for all of this. And then our work groups are more time-limited groups that come together around various opportunities. They really pull subject matter experts from across city offices and community partners. And they might be coming together around other opportunities for learning communities, a specific question we're asking and trying to solve, or a specific project. So what are our goals and some of our work? So this is just sort of a high level look. As I mentioned, we were okay starting out fairly organic as we were in a stage of trying to figure out what our work together looked like. We all had our own work as it related to economic security and mobility, and we were trying to figure out how we could make sort of the sum of the parts of our coalition greater than the individual pieces. And so in order to do that initially, we really just kind of dug into understanding what are the current conditions for the City of Alexandria. If you could click, I have a couple examples. Yeah, so first we sort of set out and conducted a participatory process to define within a community in partnership with community partners, what are the definitions for the stages of mobility for the community. So what does crisis look like? What does instability look like? What does mobility and what does stability? This was like language level setting and what are we all talking about here? We conducted a 6-question pulse check. We were really interested in understanding sort of what are people thinking, saying, how are they talking about, how are they feeling about their economic security, and most of all, what are their hopes around that? So we got out on the streets and just started talking to people. It was a conversation. It is a survey, but it's a survey we have through a conversation. We learned a lot from that, and again, can talk about that another time. But we also, lastly, in that first year with Urban, we were really kind of trying to understand, okay, if this is our economic stability spectrum, where's our current spending? Where community and city? Again, this is a really participatory process of going out to the community, showing them the pillars, and saying like, what programs things come to mind for you when you think about stable housing, et cetera? And then the resources that got mentioned, we went in this process of sort of mapping them along the spectrum of stability to try to understand where are we good and where are there gaps and opportunities to invest, and creating a more seamless pathway to stability for the city of Alexandria. So for the sake of time, I won't get into it too much, but we did participate in an additional 3 learning cohorts. We always joke that we should earn a certificate for the most Gates-funded learning communities, but it was really a time where we were trying to think through what are the local levers, what are our channels here to really create change. Narrative change rose to the top because we understand that how we're thinking about and co-creating a solution to poverty and upward mobility is deeply connected to how we're understanding the problem and the stories we're telling ourselves as practitioners and as a community. So we really worked hard to connect with and lift up resident voice as a critical part of envisioning the solutions. Lastly, we continue to really be focused on strengthening our coalition and inviting more folks to the table. As Julie was talking about, we're really excited to be in a planning process for a community forum we're hosting, bringing together practitioners from across the pillars for a collective learning and inspiration opportunity. We're really thinking through, okay, if we are the managers of these important public resources, how are we collectively or individually thinking about how we're using these systems to support economic stability, either individually or hopefully collectively, as across policy areas like Joe was talking about. So lastly, just to talk, next slide, please. Just to talk through some of our takeaways. The first one is that resident voice really is sort of an ultimate clarifier, unifier, and motivator for us. As I mentioned, we were sort of lost in the woods, really trying to figure out what is the strength of our coalition, what is the strength of us coming together. And I think over and over, what got us out of the woods and kind of refocused and motivated is looking at client voice. What are clients, what are residents saying, and what is the resident experience? And at the city, all of our strategic planning processes, from, again, the Office of Housing to all the different offices, have really intensive community outreach to building their strategic plan. So even if it's a survey that came out of a summer youth employment program, we can sort of look at it and think, oh, okay, this is the importance of this resource. And it really gives us some clarity about our work and the barriers and again, how we need to design pathways to stability. So important relationships require regular maintenance. We all know this from, the people closest to us, from our families, and everything else is no different for coalitions. There's no set it and forget it. We're sort of constantly trying to remind people why this work matters, what we're doing together, and really making the case for everybody continuing to come to the table. Part of this is always sharing the wins. That's really important because I think people kind of always have to be able to make the case for why they continue to partner. We need to show people that what's coming out of the coalition is contributing to the success of their work, separate from our work together. And so I remember attending an urban workshop, and one of the presenters was saying that it was infinitely, now I'm forgetting what it was, but essentially like the thanks and the gratitude is infinitely divisible, meaning there's always enough for everybody to share some of the respect for what happened and the sharing the wins for what happened. So again, one thing that comes out of this that Joe and Martha will probably be rolling their eyes, because this is like out of the textbook, their planning guide for local action. Like Joe was saying, really look at what you're doing and invite organization types with various strengths. I said start small, build momentum because I remember looking at the planning guide at some of the suggested partners from universities for data, et cetera, and thinking, how could I ever get these people to come to the table? And what we did was we started really small with the partners we already had, the partners we had built from Arise, our guaranteed income pilot. So we started with the trusting relationships we had, and we really built from there. And now, as we're launching our community forum work group, we've brought together kind of our biggest coalition work group yet, with partners across, even our public schools are at the table, planning and zoning, our economic development partner. It really feels like a much stronger work group than we've ever had, because we just kept at it and slowly built to the coalition. And of course, we're really excited to see what comes out of our February 5th event. We are hoping that more people will be energized and really excited to dig in around this issue and play a role. I'll just say lastly, as Julie M. said, another important part of the diversity of partnerships is that us too, I think the City of Alexandria unemployment rate has risen 1% since the federal downsizing, and there's been a lot of community partners who have had to pause and respond to other crises. And so having the diversity of different groups a part of it, we can kind of say, this group might have to take a step back right now as they're really thinking about their priorities, but as a whole, we can step up, we can fill the void, and we can provide the sustainability in a challenging moment where other people might have to pull back. So I'll stop there and pass it back to Joe.
Thank you, Julie. We've got a couple of questions for you as well, and then we'll bring back Julie Weiner and Martha. But more specific questions, which is one, people are excited to see if you can share your survey through conversations, and we can sort of figure out a way to post that. But did you get some pushback from this effort, either internally within the city or externally? Were there some hurdles that you had to navigate through?
There's always hurdles, like I said, cost of living and poverty kind of rise to the top across offices at the City of Alexandria. It's been, from our the zoning and planning department led an award-winning zoning for all campaign a few years back. Our Office of Housing is regularly really addressing the affordability issue. So, our health department, public health of all things, the community raised cost of living and poverty as something they wanted addressed in the public health plan. So, I think across policy areas, this is a resounding cry from residents that it needs to be addressed. I think the biggest challenge is just maintaining momentum, because everybody is in their pillar. They have their day job, as I think Julie was saying. And how do we come together and think through the systems and the power of the systems to somehow connect to create clear pathways to stability and mobility? So it's not an easy question. It's not an easy answer. And I think just the project management to keep the wins coming, to keep it feel like we have momentum and we're building. And in the end, that something on the ground feels different for people. That's what can sometimes feel like the challenge.
Oh, well, no, definitely. You've got to keep people above you informed and figure out ways to entice your colleagues within the city, as well as communicating with folks out in the community. So there was one question about, what do you mean by narrative change? And if you have an example, as you mentioned that you wanted to shift the narrative, and was this something that you did, I don't know, sort of actively, like, and produced like different narratives, or was it just more of a theme that was carried out through your coalition building?
Yeah, narrative change is one goal that was central to our guaranteed income pilot. And narrative is sort of like all the data points that come together to weave a common story that we're telling ourselves about why something exists. So it's, kind of conceptually challenging to think through, but it might be a story in our for example, our DCHS Connect newsletter that goes out across the city, as well as to community partners, recently ran a story about an older adult who's homeless, working in the restaurant industry, and his day-to-day challenges, and how receiving SNAP has really helped him along as he continues to struggle with the affordability crisis in the city. So it was a really humanizing look on how he gets through the day as a working adult, living in a tent. So that sort of story puts a face on what it might look like to be without housing, and in a dignified way that really shows the resilience of residents that are experiencing that. So it creates a sense of community, and that this is something that really could happen to any of us. And it's a we problem, it's a us problem, it's not us and them. So it's really humanizing people experiencing poverty. And I'll tell you, with the Canberra Collective, we did a randomized control trial for our guaranteed income pilot, and we had our interim data. And so we were specifically taking the data that came out of it. We made some videos of participants talking about their experience receiving guaranteed income. And we were able to put the storytelling and the data together to have sort of a cohesive look at why guaranteed income, why are people experiencing poverty, and what is this regular income every month doing for folks.
Got it. Well, no, that's powerful because you're right. The data tells one part of the story, or it can tell, it tells the story in a certain different way. But in order to really hit that story home, you have those individual stories to share. Well, let's bring back Julie Weiner and also Martha, and we've got some questions that, of course, cut across both sites. Just starting out is to both Julies, what are some best practices or practice tips for reaching out and onboarding community members, knowing that, when they're part of a coalition or advisory group, I mean, they may have, as you just talked about, Julie, some, personal experiences that you're trying to be sensitive to and how they're, shared and presented, but there may be some other considerations for onboarding community members as part of these coalitions. Okay. I would say, Julie, you answer that, but that means both of you would need to answer it. So why don't we start with Alexandria with A, and then we'll go to Santa Barbara.
Sure. So we have lots of different ways that we involve residents, and we do have resident boards, like our commissions. They have folks who are deeply engaged. We actually had a work group where we worked with our 3 community service providers, and it was a 4-session work group, and the whole thing was, how do we build a mechanism where we regularly involve people experiencing poverty in helping us set a bold agenda to address this pathway to stability. And resoundingly, they were like, don't do it. Come to the community when you have specific funding, come when you have something half built, so that it's not just kind of a rubber stamp from the public, but that we can really have the opportunity to engage people in a meaningful solution. We were from the government, we're constantly challenged with perpetuating harmful cycles where we come out and say, what would you like to see in the community? And then the community doesn't feel like we deliver on that, because it is a democratic process where, we're kind of envisioning the best version of our community, and there are limited public resources, and there's a whole political process of identifying where the resources will be spent. And so sometimes we can get the public excited, and then projects don't move as fast or aren't as quick, or don't come to fruition. So we're very careful about how we involve people. I feel like I could do a whole webinar just on that, so let me stop there. But I will say, sorry, I won't stop there. One thing I'd add is that we do work really closely. Again, we ran Arise. We were in regular contact with our 170 participants, and so we were constantly just engaging with them. That's one of the reasons we launched the coalition with Alive, our food bank, and Neighborhood Health, our community clinic, is that the people are there. These are frontline organizations that on any given day can say, this isn't a unique moment that federal workers are at the food hub. Federal workers are actually always at the food hub, because this is a very high cost of living area. So we're always connecting ourselves to our residents that we're serving every day, as well as the residents that our community partners are serving.
Right, the organizations. Julie, how about your experience with the community?
Yeah, I'd say where we had started to involve them was once we launched the MAP groups, we joined forces. Well, we had already been in touch with a group called EPIC, End Poverty in California. And their CEO actually was on one of our panels during the summit. And that was when we were talking about changing the narrative. Right? So he was on that panel. But part of what they've been doing is they've been doing listening sessions up and down the state of California, gathering information, posting reports. And, California's California. It's not like we're California and Ohio or some other completely different area. So there's a lot of similarity into what they're picking up across the state of what the residents, the low-income people that are involved in the listening sessions are saying. But every area has its unique needs and maybe, priorities. So whereas housing might be higher in one, food might be in another. So we did listening sessions across the county. We did 5 of them. We had originally planned to do 3 in-person listening sessions, and the idea was that the qualitative content that would come out of those would then be taken back to the MAP groups, and the MAP groups could really hear from the people having the daily experience to inform what they prioritize as a problem we wanted to try and solve at the county level or at the city level. But 2 weeks before we were about to hold the listening sessions, we were hit by a sweep of ICE raids really badly across our county. And people were terrified. People didn't want to take the bus. And for all sorts of reasons tied to this, we decided that it didn't make sense to do in-person sessions. So we originally had hoped to have 3 sessions with a minimum of 20 attendees each. So what we did is we pivoted and we changed those to 5 sessions with a desired 10 or so attendees each, and put them on Zoom. And we knew that that might mean that somebody who would have come to something in person might not attend if they didn't have a tablet or a laptop or stable internet. But we didn't want to expose anybody because they needed to take public transportation. We were hearing a lot of, I don't want to sit at a bus stop. And so we did them by Zoom. We tried to keep them small. In some ways they were effective. In other ways, I have no way to compare to how effective or less effective they might have been to the in-person. Now, we've had a post-session debrief with EPIC. We haven't received the final collating of the feedback. We did hear a lot, and I think it was just the people that we got to come. We heard quite a bit of people that had had justice involvement somewhere in their past, and how that was tripping them up from getting jobs, having stable income, getting housing, being able to go back to school full time. So that was something that kind of rose to the top, which our fair and just governance pillar is really leveraging in terms of the work that they're doing. And it was very eye-opening. So, but I would say one of the things that came out of that is that it made us very clear on how much was challenging to solve at the county level or the city level,
Right.
and how much of the hurdles people are facing really have to do with state and, more importantly, federal regulations
Federal
or
barriers, right.
policies. So yeah, I think we're all a little bit like, oh my gosh, how are we going to solve these? And then we just sort of doubled down and said, okay, we always said we were just going to work at what we can do here at the county level.
Right. Well, and that's like I say, that you're trying to channel your energies on where you can have the greatest impact, right? But
Right.
also you have to adjust, right? Your strategies, you have to adjust how you engage, based on, those external factors that are, requiring us all to, well, scratch our heads and also make pivots. So here's more of a big picture question. And Martha, I want you to sort of lead out on this. Is in some ways, we've got two great examples of two different organizations who have acted as the backbone, sort of as the initial, home coordinator, facilitator for the coalition. So, in your not only listening to these two, but other examples, what makes a good backbone organization for an upward mobility coalition? And can there be different types of organizations?
Yeah, this is a great question, and I think both Julies would also have things to add. But of course, we've seen lots of different types of organizations play this role. Certainly, we've seen governments do this. We've also seen community foundations play the role of backbone organizations. In some cases, CBOs and nonprofits. And then I've also seen situations where the community has decided that they want to kind of start their own nonprofit or collaborative that's kind of a completely separate entity to lead the work forward. I think there's, of course, pluses and minuses with all of these. I think, as Julie W. points out, government has the policy capacity, which can be really important in making change on upward mobility. But also, I think one of the challenges is that of course, governments are impacted by elections that can lead to turnover and change the focus of the work. CBOs are great in that they have connections to the public and bringing in impacted populations to the conversations, but they might not have the time and resources to be able to be the backbone. Foundations might have the resources, but maybe not the connections to the public or the reputation. So I think just kind of carefully considering who is the representative. And then I think in terms of, the qualities that make a good backbone, I'm thinking about things like an organization that has experience fundraising, or at least being able to braid and blend funding in support of shared goals, or organizations I think that are good of kind of telling the story of the work and know what's being done, and can really talk about the work in a shared way. One that has a good reputation as a trusted partner and isn't there to kind of boost its own reputation, but is really acting on behalf of the collective and the members. I think, as Julie M. mentioned, they need to be able to continually make the case about why the partnership should stay together. So, an organization that really has the energy to kind of continually say, like, stay with us, stay with us, stay with us. This is why we're still doing this. I think other things like being able to help the coalition speak in a shared voice. That includes, having a common narrative about what's going on, developing shared goals, having a shared measurement system. And then, of course, an organization that really has the capacity, and I don't mean just the capacity to convene the coalition, but to do all the other little things that have to happen to move the work forward. So recruiting new members, onboarding community members, as we talked about. They might need to do, Joe, I've heard you use this term, shuttle diplomacy, right? Maybe there's a member who's unhappy or needs to be kind of brought in to the work, and they're kind of doing all of the one-off work with individual partners. So an organization that's kind of nimble and has the time to be doing that.
So I don't know. Yeah, Julie, thoughts about being the backbone organization?
Yeah, I just want to chime into what Martha's saying. I think one of the boons that we had in our coalition, just by sheer, kind of randomness, was that the member that of our coalition, very, she was like the number two in, came from our community foundation, but she was their head of data and data analysis. And in fact, she's the one that found the upward mobility framework. But later on, when we did our summit, we did a data walk. And, like I said, we got pushback from non-believers about the data saying that our county was as highly ranked in its percentage of poverty, of the population living in poverty as it was. Our chamber was reporting something much, much, much lower at the time. And so, yeah, so I think having somebody on the team, no matter where they reside, that is competent and comfortable with data. As you get into it, I think that's important. It might be the data analysis, it might be compiling the data, is an asset. Maybe it's not key, but I think in our case it was very key, and it was a huge asset. I also I would say that having been the chief fundraiser for this project, but also working for a CBO, I would say in the long run, maybe it's better to have somebody who's a backbone, who's the backbone organization, who is part of the local economic government structure or part of the community foundation, just so that, like, I'm getting pulled away because of my day job right now, right? And I don't
Right.
want that to happen, but I've been chief cat herder, so I know that as I get pulled away, that some of our forward momentum naturally will slow down, because I won't have as much time to keep the logistical stuff moving
Right.
forward.
Well,
So
and you raise a good point that the backbone role evolves, and there are coalitions that have tandem backbone organizations, right? Because they each
yeah,
bring different capacity. And again, as times change, sometimes, the backbone evolves, but if you've got the structure and the plan in place, then it's going to make it easy for that transition. Julie Mullen, anything to add about being the backbone? Are you don't think about that twice during the day, like, oh, why am I in this position?
No, I love it. And I think, for us, it has been a good spot for us as government, as the convener, because we do want to put a stake in the ground for the community, that the government really cares about this. And for us, it's the government that's really, convening partners. It is a partnership. And even in our last coalition meeting, we were all reminding ourselves, let's all play our role, because, we as government employees do not advocate for any one solution. We sort of bring the data, bring the resident voice, and make sure we're properly informing the elected officials, and echoing back what the residents are saying. But our community foundation, they're an advocacy arm. They're somebody that can really sit down with the mayor, sit down with other major players and leaders, and say, hey, this is what we're advocating for. This is what we think needs to happen. So it just takes a team. I come from the nonprofit worlds, but I've been really pleasantly surprised at our Office of Performance Analytics, to the data questions, so talented, such an immense amount of local data. It is nice to be in this seat where we do have the local government and the tools and resources afforded to a local government to really help kind of put the pieces together and understand what are our current conditions. So it does take a team.
Got it. Well, we have time for maybe one quick question. So how do you, in terms of sustain momentum and energy? So thinking about particularly coalition members, fatigue, things like that, just like a quick answer as to, any practice tips for maybe motivational practice tips to keep people engaged and going forward.
Yeah, it's a challenge. It really is, but I think because it's so resonant, this challenge in our community, I would say position yourself to where the action is. And so, for example, right now our health department is doing their big community health improvement planning process, and it's huge. And they're doing 2 neighborhoods this year. They're doing it different. They're building these neighborhood coalitions, and we know that poverty and cost of living again is going to, really be important. So as the coalition, we're really positioning ourselves, hand in hand with them, both to hear what residents are saying again, and really be a resource to them. So part of it is just always having something that we feel like is adding value to something current going on, and then adding our own value where we can, whether it's from the pulse check survey to the forum that we're planning, or we're bringing people together, and really working across with a vibrant work group to plan that strategic conversation. So it's a lot of different things, and then sometimes you just have to say, we're going to take the month off. It's December and we're not going to meet this month. So you have to know when to give everybody a break.
Well, speaking of break, as you can see, the slide has come up, so that's my signal that we are done with this. Again, applause, applause, applause for both of the Julies and your insights into helping people really activate the upward mobility framework and learn from you about the trials and tribulations of building a coalition. It's not easy, and we know you've had to persevere through some barriers and obstacles, but we appreciate so much the work that you do, and we know for sure that your communities are benefiting from your commitment and leadership on this. So we appreciate you spending time with us today and appreciate the work that you're doing in your communities. Martha, it's all up to you to wrap us up.
Take us out. So thank you all again for coming. We have a couple different ways that you can stay in touch with us and learn about upcoming events, opportunities, resources. So of course, we've got our website, upward-mobility.urban.org. You can find our upward mobility data dashboard there with data for your community. Our toolkit for increasing upward mobility is there. We've got tons of blogs and case studies. So it's a great resource if you're just looking to learn more. We also have our next workshop planned for December 10th. That will feature speakers from our Measuring Impact track, and they'll talk about using data to inform strategic priorities and how they're measuring success. So definitely sign up to attend that. You can also subscribe to our newsletter. That's where we share any new resources that come out. So if we do have any new opportunities, trainings, new case studies, that sort of thing, you'll hear about it first by receiving that newsletter. And then, of course, you can send us an email at upwardmobility@urban.org. I know we got tons of questions today for our panelists, and we only got to answer a very small share of them. So if you still have a question that you would love to have answered, please send it to the email. We'd be happy to follow up with you and share more. So thank you for that. And then just on our last slide, if you've got a second, if you could scan the QR code and take a brief survey about today's webinar. We always appreciate hearing what you liked and how we can improve for future webinars, and also how we can support you in doing upward mobility work locally. So if you've got a second, please scan the QR code. And with that, just thank you all again for joining us, and we hope to see you in December.
All right, take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.